Chris, we're here post-European night against FC Porto. Manchester United, they go 2-0 up. Then it ends up being 2-2, 3-2. Harry Maguire comes in clutch with an equaliser. Do you feel like that's enough for Erik Ten Hag tonight?
It's hard, isn't it, Beth? I mean, here we are again, a big night in Europe, Manchester United. It's all gone a bit crazy. You think last season, Galatasaray, Bayern Munich, FC Copenhagen. We've seen it all before, haven't we? And Erik talks about processes. He talks about about this team being in transition. But where's the difference from last season? Where's the progress? What's different to those crazy games last season? The 4-3s, the 3-2s, the 3-3s. I just don't see it, and it's very hard to say. Is it enough for him? Clearly, he's in trouble right now. There's talk about his future. Again, there's doubts over his job. Again. It's very hard to kind of dip your toe in and say, is a draw here enough? Is a win at Villa enough? There's an international break coming up and they've got a big call to make.
I mean, from your side of things, there's been a lot of talk about Erik Ten Hag basically having 2 games to save his job. What do you think Ineos's view and perspective is on this? Because it's unsustainable really to have a manager that's just going from game to game to game, needing to win, hanging on to his job by a thread. Do you think that is the case? Do you think, obviously with Aston Villa, the next game, do you think that is Ten Hag's job on the line?
I think it's on the line anyway. Whether Villa is it or not it, I don't know. The club themselves are pushing back against the idea of 2 games or now 1 game to save his job. That's not the way they want to be seen to be working, to be kind of tossing the coin in heads or tails. But obviously, for any manager, it's about results. And at some stage, there comes a cut-off point. And it came after the cup final, or before the cup final too, when they were looking at making a change. In the end, they didn't. So something made them, not pull the trigger in that case. Will they now? It just feels like it's very much in the balance again. And I think everyone felt with Erik, that we're very happy for him, really, that they won the cup final and you felt that was a clean slate for him and the new structure above him, below him, more money on new players. You thought, right, great, now's a chance for him to kick on and succeed, hopefully, and it hasn't happened. And we just feel in this start to the season, they have gone backwards.
I mean, there was talk coming out of lots of different places that Manchester United players maybe didn't fully believe in Erik Ten Hag's tactics and believe in the way he wants to play, and that some players even assumed he was going to be sacked in the summer. I mean, is that your understanding as well, that maybe he doesn't have the full dressing room on his side?
I don't think any manager ever does. If you think of the size of any top club there, the number of players they carry in a squad, it's impossible to have all of them on side. And
game time and everything like
that. In general, I think the players are still behind him, and that was clear tonight too. I mean, the players didn't throw it in then. They were still fighting for him.
I've said multiple times, players have fought for Erik Ten Hag.
100%.
We're just not good enough.
Yeah, it's they are behind him in principle. Do they understand his tactics? Are they following his tactics? Do we know what tactics are?
Clearly not. Clearly not, because I said to Erik Ten Hag yesterday in the press conference, tactically Benny McCarthy's been singing your praises, but surely the players aren't delivering them in the way that you'd want, because we're not seeing performances, never mind results on the pitch. I mean, Benny McCarthy spoke about a communication problem potentially with the passion of Erik Ten Hag. Do you think that could be an issue?
Yeah, I think he is, without trying to paint all the Dutch in a certain way, I think he has a very typical kind of forthright Dutch attitude. I'm not sure all the players like that. I don't think all of them, are his biggest fans, but I think crucially they are behind him, but is it working out? So much of what we saw last season is happening all over again. You look at the lack of progress, you look at £200 million spent. Is De Ligt an improvement on Maguire? On tonight's evidence, definitely not. That you're looking at Matsurugi, you're looking at Agati on the bench, you're looking at Xerxes on the bench, you're looking at still no left back. I mean, I find it incredible that after last season they have not got a specialist left back into this club, and once again they're waiting on Luke Shaw, they're waiting on Tyrell Malacia. You know, they bought Matsui because he could play left and right, but he's playing right, Dello's playing left. Dello's having a hard time right now. You know, there's so many issues that date back to last season that haven't been sorted out, in spite of the so-called progress, more money spent. And that's the biggest downfall for Erik Ten Hag, is that they've not kicked on in the way they hoped to after winning that cup final.
Well, I mean, there's a rumour that not Erik Ten Hag, that Diogo Dalot is playing potentially with an injury because we've got nobody else. I mean, that wouldn't surprise me. But like you just said there, just touching on that, you know, Joshua Zirkzee on the bench, Ugarte unused today, and there was rumours Ten Hag maybe wasn't in the biggest favour of his transfer. I mean, do you have clarification on that? Do you think Erik Ten Hag was in favour of bringing Manuel Ugarte to Manchester United?
Honestly, I don't know. And I mean, in theory, with Erik staying, he kept his title, he kept his veto on transfers, so nothing changed from that point of view. But clearly, Ineos coming in and the people, Dan Ashworth, you know, and Jason Wilcox coming in, will be having more of a say. I think that's fair to assume. I don't know what the dynamic is between Ten Hag and Ugarte, but the fact that he went back to that more experienced, you can say, but slightly older tandem of Eriksson and Casemiro here tonight, worked okay. Eriksson was involved in the first 2 goals, you know, but again, doesn't feel like it's a forward move. We're kind of falling back to last season, and you just, with Erik, you want to see the way forward. You just can't always see the way forward. And I think maybe the players are the same, that they do back him. They want to follow him where he's going, but we're not quite sure where he is going.
It's like, for example, last season, Scott McTominay was nearly out the door, ends up being a really clutch player for Manchester United. Christian Eriksen this summer was nearly out the door, probably been one of the best performers so far. You want to be walking into the future, but it feels like you're relying on the past. I understand that point of view.
Maguire tonight.
Exactly, Maguire tonight, and a lot of people have questioned that De Ligt signing. I mean, you're only a few games in, but when you are always on edge like a club with Manchester United, these things are put in such magnifying detail, and I think it makes it hard for any player to succeed, to be honest, especially when you're constantly under this sort of pressure. But players do have to stand up. I mean, you look at the leadership within that dressing room. Bruno Fernandes, obviously, 2nd red card in a row. People question whether they should be red cards, but the leadership team at Manchester United, do you think it's doing enough?
Oh, it's hard to say. I mean, it's early. Well, it's fairly early days still in them coming in. They're still trying to find their way. They've obviously backed Erik in the outset. What do they do now? It's a big call. You know, they'll be looked at as well, because they'll be thinking, fans will be thinking, you know, are you going to act now? Are you going to say, enough's enough? We've seen enough in these first 10 games of the season that it's not working out, and now we'll act? Or do you stay with Erik, which some people would still support, and potentially, the way it's going, you're writing off another season? We're barely into October.
Well, there was rumours that at the end of last season, Jason Wilcox was telling Erik Ten Hag that he might have to play it a little bit more compact and shore things up a little bit. So, you know, Jason Wilcox, these sort of performances, results, will he be, you know, asking questions and speaking to Erik Ten Hag, do you think?
No one can be happy. No one can be happy with how the season started, where it's going. You know, it all comes down to the results on the pitch, and right now they're not good enough. And you look across, you know, all the games so far, and what would worry me is even the games, apart from Barnsley, that have been won. You look at, you know, like Fulham could have gone either way. You go down to Southampton like we did, and that penalty save changes the game. That could have worked out very differently. So it's not as though, you know, they've been unlucky so far. In fact, I think it's the other way around. I think potentially it could have been absolutely disastrous, but they've got a couple of wins that have gone their way. And I mean, maybe Brighton was a bit unfortunate, but that was But yeah, I don't think anybody in the club, anybody seeing the Arse, Jim Ratcliffe, anybody watching what's going on right now can be happy. And what concerns me about tonight is, again, it was back to the madness of last season. I think what was encouraging me up to probably Palace was there was more control, there was more sanity about Man United this season. And tonight was just like a throwback. And you're thinking, well, you know, what's going on?
It doesn't matter what team it is either. It's like Copenhagen, Galatasaray, FC Porto, Bayern Munich, obviously your top team. It's consistent, feels this way in Europe. I mean, I wanted to ask you about Ruud van Nistelrooy, because a lot of rumours that he might take over as interim manager if Erik Ten Hag does lose his job. Stuff coming out about maybe PSV players not being the happiest with him when he was there, and whether he would be able to succeed. What's your view on that?
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, we were in this very room last night, Beth, weren't we? When Erik, without unprompted, wasn't asked about Ruud van Nistelrooy, came out and said, you know, I make the decisions. I appointed my 2 number 2s.
Wanted to make it clear, didn't he?
Yeah, without any kind of prompting at all. So clearly, you know, what's been written and talked about this week has maybe stung him slightly. I think the club would be very naive if they thought that by getting rid of Mitchell, Van der Gaag and Steve McLaren and bringing in a new backroom team that included Ruud van Nistelrooy, that wouldn't make people think twice. They would look at that and they'd think, okay, you know, great move, you know, but immediately you're putting someone on Erik's shoulder that if things don't start well, that there is somebody there who the fans obviously love, knows the club, turned down a lot of number 1 jobs this summer to come back to Man United, which is okay, fine. But, you know, he's an ambitious person, Ruud van Nistelrooy. I'm not saying therefore he wants a job, therefore he'll get the job. But as I say, the club would be naive to think that people wouldn't put 2 and 2 together. If that makes 5, then so be it. But I think people were always going to ask that question if things didn't go well. And unlike before, yeah, I mean, they have somebody now in-house who, if they do decide, and personally I hope they don't, but if they do decide to move Erik on, then they've got someone there that wasn't there before who can step in.
Lastly, I just wanted to ask you about the manager situation, maybe in a little bit more detail. I was just speaking to some people in the mix zone then, some journalists who have this idea that Sir Jim Ratcliffe, Sir Dave Brailsford really loved the idea of rebuilding Manchester United with Gareth Southgate and Dan Ashworth worked together to rebuild England. They feel like he could do it in Manchester United. Have you heard that he could be a very viable candidate for the job?
I heard the opposite. I heard that when there was a lot of talk about Southgate, obviously a few months ago, it wasn't as strongly supported within Ineos that people were making out that it was. That could be wrong, that could be duff information, I don't know. But clearly, again, if you have someone like Gareth Southgate on the job market, you know, yes, I think there's this idea that Ineos and Sir Jim, you know, were quite like an English coach. Immediately kind of projects the likes of Southgate, Graham Potter into the thinking. I can understand the fans thinking. You know, I can understand that, you know, that maybe, you know, Southgate's not the kind of person or the kind of profile that they would want. I get that, but again, the same answer as with Ruud van Nistelrooy, that when you've got someone like that who's available on the market and you might make a change, then he's obviously going to get thrown into the mix.
And then just quickly, so your personal opinion, do you think Erik Ten Hag should be stuck with through this season, or do you think if things continue then a change needs to be made?
Knowing Erik, my heart says I hope they stick with him. The more I see this season unfold, the more in my head I have my doubts.
That's exactly how I feel, Chris. Thank you so much for joining us and giving that update. Hopefully, against Aston Villa, we see Erik Ten Hag pull it out the bag and these players fight for him again. It's going to be a very, very tough ask. But get down in the comments down below. What do you think of Chris's comments there? How do you feel about Manchester United? How do you feel about Erik Ten Hag's position? Let's hope we can get a result against Aston Villa, but it's not looking too great at the moment. Thank you for watching, everyone. Please make sure you hit a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel. I think it's about past midnight here, so bringing this content for you before the Aston Villa game. Thank you again, Chris.
Pleasure.
And we will see you on the next one.